Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cave Across Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're joined today by the great Greg Koukl.
Oh, cut it out.
You might know Greg Koukl from watching our show, obviously, the tens of 12s of you that have watched it. We've just finished up Tactics, and the author is gracious to come on to talk to us about what we might have missed and what questions we might have, and see if we can destroy him right off the bat, or if he's as nice as what his book pertains to.
That's right.
So just to give you an introduction, probably you know probably him more than I'll even remotely begin to cover here. But Greg Koukl received his master's in philosophy of religion and ethics at Talbot School of Theology, and his master's in Christian apologetics with honors from Simon Greenfield University, and he's an adjunct professor in Christian apologetics at Biola University. Greg founded Stand to Reason in 1993 and currently serves as president of Stand to Reason. He has spoken to more than 70 colleges and universities, both in the U.S. and abroad, and has hosted his own call-in show for 27 years, advocating for Christianity worth thinking about. He has written 7 books, including The Story of Reality, How the World Began, How It Ends, and everything important that happens in between. Relativism, Feet Firmly Planted in Midair, and, of course, The Great Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. So, Greg, thank you once again for coming on our show.
Well, you're welcome. And listening to all of that, man, no wonder I feel tired.
One of the very first interactions that I had with your content was you were still doing videos for Stand to Reason, and you were going to solve my issue because I was just starting to read Scott Christensen's What About Free Will, and I had Bondage of the Will all set aside. I was gonna do free will compatibilism all in a year, and I got through one book in 9 months. So you were going to help me kind of get over the hurdle and talk about how does it work with God's actions and then our actions. And you said, well, you know, I'm not really fully set in my understanding of this.
Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not either, you know, because, well, really, you get to a point of mystery. And frankly, I'm not even satisfied with the categories that are characteristically offered, the 3, because 2 are of some form of determinism, and the other one is extreme on the other side. It's libertarian freedom. And so, and which means that you have the, you know, could have done otherwise capability. You know, you are the author of your own decisions, and you have the power to do otherwise. And I think those are not adequate to cover the area. So I think it becomes difficult, you know. I'll give you one example. I was talking to a friend of mine about being in love. You know, do you love your children? Yeah, I love my children. When did you start loving your children? When they were born, man. Did you choose to love them? No, it just kind of happened. Well, are you a machine? No. So there wasn't a choice there. It's a real affection that you have, but it wasn't also machine-like. So there's some other thing that's going on there that's part of the human condition. And so I'm not surprised that you are still wondering about this, because after 47 years, so am I.
Yeah. Well, and I was just flabbergasted that someone had the audacity to go on YouTube and say, I don't really know about this, and I'm okay with that, and we should be too. And there's more discussion to be had. So I greatly appreciated the honesty in that video. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so I guess the first question that I have to ask here is your organization is called Stand to Reason. And I just want to know, is it okay to sit to reason? What do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion?
You can even lie down to reason if you'd like to. But actually, which I do on more often than not nowadays. But I chose that language because I wanted to emphasize the notion that Christians are advocates, that they are not passively involved in the cultural conversation. They are not letting the culture mold them and direct them. They are not simply passively accepting what the culture defines as truth, but rather they are being informed by the truth of reality. And we know that largely, well, actually 2 ways. One of them is what God tells us, but largely we can know a lot of things about reality just because of faculties he gives us to discover the reality. And it's great when the 2 go together, you know. In other words, our view of the world fits the way the world actually is. It's the best explanation for the way things are. And so what I wanted to implicitly encourage Christians to think about is that it's our job to stand up, to stand tall, to, if necessary, stand in the line of, well, I used to say, like, I think intellectual fire, so to speak, but it's becoming more and more costly. It's not just emotionally costly, but it's personally costly to stand up for Christ in this country. And it's always been costly in many other countries and for the last 2,000 years. So I just wanted to convey the idea that we want Christians to stand tall. You stand and stand firm. You don't give way. You don't give in. It doesn't mean you're nasty. It means you're just not going to be pushed around. And you stand to make a case. And so both of those things are involved with the concept of standing to reason. So we have something to say. We have thoughtful Christianity. We have a rationale that makes sense of our views.
So how'd you get interested in apologetics and and that sort of thing?
Well, about 2 weeks ago, I had my spiritual birthday, and it was 47 years.
Oh, wow.
1973. Yeah, thank you. And that was right in the middle of the Jesus movement, and there were all kinds of things happening in the culture there in the early 70s. We were right in the throes of the massive counterculture that started mid-60s when I was in high school. And so when I became a Christian, all kinds of ideas were flowing wildly and crazily, and that was a period of time when it was okay to have different ideas. You weren't shouted down because you didn't believe the right thing. There wasn't any political correctness then.
No cancel culture.
Yeah, there was, but it was the Berkeley free speech movement. Come on. Right. So, I mean, you go to Cal now, forget about free speech, But in any event, so there was lots of conversation about spiritual things. When I became a Christian too, and my circumstances are a little bit unique in this regard, is that I did not have apologetics as a feature of what persuaded me to become a Christian. My best explanation is simply I came to a increasing awareness that Christianity was true. I mean, that's not very fancy schmancy, but that's the way it was in my case.
You had the bare facts and everything like that. You just
it was just a thing of the Holy Spirit, and then when people are asking me, and I was quite vocal, I was at Westwood Village at UCLA, and the streets there in Westwood Village, all kinds of crazy things were going on, and ideas were flowing, and people walking around with stands and religious trips. So I'm engaging, but I don't know what to say. And so I start getting confronted with things, and I don't know how to answer it. Now, in my case, fortunately, within 4 months of becoming a Christian, that was in September 73, by February 74, I was living in a Christian community in Westwood Village with about 120 other people, and some really fabulous teachers that all had been formerly with Campus Crusade for Christ, and they all got mad at Bill Bright at the same time, and then they made their exit, but they had this school called it's kind of corny sounding, but Jesus Christ Light and Powerhouse, But it was a Christian community where we studied Christianity, and I mean, the guy who discipled Josh McDowell was one of the teachers, Dick Day. So anyway, it got me into an environment right away where I could get content, substance, information. I could get theological foundation built. But at the same time, I was introduced to Francis Schaeffer and Josh McDowell and John Montgomery. Actually, there weren't many guys going back there. Walter Martin and Schaeffer and McDowell and Norm Geisler was around then, John Montgomery, but that was about it. And I was really influenced quite a bit by Francis Schaeffer. Yeah. And so that's what gave me, for some reason, I just gravitated towards that. It just clicked with me. It was a delicious thing to kind of traffic in these ideas and also flesh out the rational foundation for my own Christianity. And so that's kind of what got me going there, Tony, is that. And as time went on, I wanted to communicate that with other people. And so it was just natural for me when I had opportunity to do a presentation or something to start integrating that kind of stuff and learn more and integrate more, that kind of thing.
Wow. So you're the second guest that we've had. We talked with Nancy Piercy a little bit ago. And she obviously was really influenced by Francis Schaeffer.
She was
now I'm hearing you influenced by Francis Schaeffer. So he had a tremendous influence apparently during that particular time.
That's right, and he still does, a little bit more at a distance. Os Guinness was a Schaeffer guy, and he actually ran one of the Labries. So there are quite a number of people that were deeply influenced by Schaeffer, and there are a lot of things in the Tactics book that bear his mark, that bear Schaeffer's mark. Nancy is fabulous, and you can see in her books like Total Truth and Saving Leonardo and books like that. Yeah, that's right. That she is well tutored by Schaeffer, and she's employing his very, very sound approaches to the whole enterprise of apologetics. She was actually generous enough. I've known Nancy for a long time, but she's busy, and she wrote the foreword to The Story of Reality, and it's a magnificent launch for the book. Yeah. So yes, Schaeffer has been a real an impact on me, and the trilogy, that three main works that you can get in one volume now from Crossway, The God Who Is There, He Is There and He Is Not Silent, and Escape from Reason, really, really helped lay a foundation for me and an understanding of modernity, which was in play then, but also prescient for the challenges of postmodernity that we're kind of facing in many ways now.
Yeah, I remember reading that, and I was thinking to myself, why is he writing in the past? And you got to look at the copyright and go, oh, he was a prophet. It just came to pass. He warned us, and no one was listening.
Right, he was in the past. Right, that's right.
It was happily sad to see how much he warned and how much went by, and probably to a greater extent. It would have been interesting, and it's nice that we do have Nancy Pierce. I honestly think she's almost writing through him in Love Thy Body, because just what she deals with, the hard concepts and the hard truths that Christians, I think, want to go, well, I'm asked this in the workplace, and I don't really want to offend people, but she's got the answers. And she
does. I think the strength for Schaeffer was that he understood how ideas affect cultures, and from philosophy there are entailments. One thing is entailed by another thing. So if you believe this, the next step is this other thing, because they're connected, and that's where you're going. And that's what Schaeffer saw. He saw all the things people were adopting there in the 60s and the 70s, and he was saying, this is going to take us somewhere else, just by the natural nature of the ideas themselves. Okay, and this is exactly what has happened.
Yeah. So speaking of taking ideas, taking us where they are. When we were talking about this book, I said, Patrick, this book would make a great book for a critical thinking class. I'm talking
agree,
about tactics.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
And so I said, maybe this is full of informal logic, and this is really, really good. Yeah. So. We jokingly, I said, but isn't he giving away, all of his secrets? Yeah. I mean, he's letting everybody know what the strategy or the tactics are.
Yeah, I actually included some of that in the footnotes, where I talked about in the game plan, the 3-step game plan. And the first issue is to gather information, and we use a question called, what do you mean by that? But that's the first step of critical thinking. If you want to think critically about an issue, you've got to get the issue itself right and in clear focus. That's first step. And then the next step is, what are the reasons that people would hold that idea? And that's how do you come to that conclusion? So, and then there's an analysis phase. So in a certain sense, that is a very simple way of characterizing the process of critical thinking. You're right. I'm flattered that you saw that. I'm with you on that one, man.
That'll be for the 20th anniversary edition.
Yeah.
So why'd you write the book?
Yeah.
Well, what had happened over the years of me engaging, and I started radio in 1990, and 4 years before we started Stand to Reason, and because I'm now, it's not just in my casual encounters with people that I'm engaging, but now I'm engaging in a much wider audience on the air. I'm reflective on how I can best present the gospel, okay? And I tend to be on the left brain side. I mean, obviously, I think for most people, and so that's the direction I'm going. I'm just kind of being myself. And as I look back over the years of doing this, I realized, there are very particular things that I'm doing intentionally, that if I isolate them, itemize them, look at them. I can refine them and do them better. And I can also transfer those concepts to other people. And so I noticed, for example, that some points of view self-destruct. And actually, they self-destruct in different kinds of ways. You know, some just self-destruct in themselves. You say there is no truth. Well, is that true? You know, kind of thing. Or like, I can't speak a word in English. Well, what was that I thought I just heard, kind of thing. So some things are immediately and internally incoherent and self-destructive. But then there are other times where you have in practice that they become self-destructive. So if you might believe that it's wrong to tell anybody else they're wrong. But the minute you say that, then you're violating your own conviction, you know? And so that's a practical, what I call suicide. And so as I began to look at these things and refine them, I saw that there are different particular ways that these could be characterized. I gave names to them, like suicide in that particular case, whether it's formal suicide or practical suicide or sibling rivalry suicide. I was in an event once and people were complaining about it. This particular event was a showcasing a movie that I got a chance to, with the author or with the writers and directors, sit on the stage afterwards and talk about. And it was the issue of the Holocaust came up, and people were saying, yeah, what kind of God would do that? You know, allow that? Well, common question, understandable. And then, you know, somebody mentioned something about judgment and punishment. And then what kind of, oh, that's a nice God, you know, judging everybody. And I said, well, wait a minute. You notice what just happened? You guys have two objections that are opposing each other. You can either have God not doing anything or him doing something. But you can't complain at both ends. That's right. A sibling rivalry is what I call that. So anyway, over time, these things began to flesh themselves out. And at the time, this was the, early 90s. And Craig Hazen, who runs the Apologetics MA program at Biola now, he was actually running the program at Simon Greenleaf University. So I was under Craig. Now, I had graduated from there, but he was still running classes there before I moved over to Biola. And he asked me to come in, and he was the one who challenged me to put this together in a more formal presentation. So that was the first time that I actually taught the tactics, such as they were at the time. And I wrote the book now 11 years ago, the initial book. And just before it went to press, I was thinking the Columbo Tactic, which is the question-asking tactic, I realized is actually the game plan, and all the rest of the tactics serve the game plan. So I had them split the book in two parts, the game plan and the rest kind of deal. And that's kind of the genesis of the whole project. And as time went on, I've just been adding to it or refining it or finding better ways to explain it.
So when we are talking to atheists, especially nowadays, it always seems that they want you to provide kind of positive evidence for your side, and critiquing the other side is just, it's just dodging the question. So especially with the claim that atheism is this lack of belief, they don't bring anything to the table, they want you to bring all of it. Does tactics provide us the best approach to talk to people like this?
Well, strictly speaking, tactics are formal categories for maneuvering, okay, and for spotting flaws. So you have the game plan, which is where you use questions to either gather information or to reverse the burden of proof when appropriate, or to use questions to make your own point. There's no substance there. It's a formal category. It's the way that you do things, okay? And then in the book, I give illustrations of particulars, all right? So if you don't know anything, you use the first two steps because you're getting into the shallow end of the pool and you're getting an education. If you know what's wrong with, say, atheism, when you're talking to an atheist, now you can start using questions to make a point. But of course, you have to know what's wrong with atheism from other sources. You can learn a few things from the illustrations I have in the book. And as you know, there are lots and lots of illustrations of real life circumstances that I've been in. But the best thing is you kind of get your content from other sources, and then you use the game plan motif and the other tactics to maneuver in the conversation. So, for example, one difficulty with atheism is that there's no grounding for morality. If materialism is true, and almost every single atheist is a materialist. In other words, it's just particles all the way down. You know, in the cosmos is all there is, ever was, or ever will be. You know, Carl Sagan's famous comment. And so, if that's the case, well, moral obligations aren't physical. They don't extend in space. They don't have chemical content. They don't respond to the laws of physics. So if materialism is true, then morality can't be. Right. Now, I know their move is just to go to evolution, but evolution can't create morality. All it does, in principle, all it can do is create beliefs about morality that turn out to be false, right, but aid the survival. Okay. So then, on that view, rape is not wrong, nor is genocide, by the way. In fact, genocide, argue, might serve the purposes of evolution, okay? And frankly, Darwin was exceptionally racist as an individual, according to today's standards, based on his understanding of evolution. And this is pretty obvious in the longer subtitle of The Origin of Species, which is so long I can't remember it, but it talks about the inferior races, right? So this creates a problem then for an atheist, because an atheist like, say, Richard Dawkins, when he talks about materialism, this is a world in which there's no good or there's no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, a famous citation of his. But then in the God delusion, he starts squawking about the God of the Bible as being a homophobic and genocidal and all these moral judgments. Right. And so here's my question. Now I know that's inconsistent, okay, because we talked about entailment earlier, and if you believe in materialism, what's entailed in that is no morality, no objective morality. All right? That's part of the package. Okay? So then my question becomes, where's the standard that you're getting to judge God by? What is the standard you're using to judge God by? Now, I actually had a conversation on the air with an atheist who is a Boghossian disciple, and because his view was evolution. So what you're saying is, when you say something is wrong, you're saying it disagrees with your evolution. And he said, yes. Well, at least he was honest. Yeah. But you can see how vacuous that response is. So what? Okay, it disagrees with your evolution. Doesn't disagree with mine. Doesn't disagree with Hitler's or ISIS or Donald Trump's, for goodness sake. So where's your basis for complaint? Mm-hmm. That is a very fair criticism of materialistic atheism. So notice how I have some content understanding of the problem that I might have gotten somewhere else, but I use the tactical game plan to employ that. Mm-hmm. So the two kind of have to go together. One is more formal. Some views are self-defeating. Okay, well, that's kind of a formal category. Oh, what about postmodernism? Yes, postmodernism is the view that there is no grand narrative, of truth over everything. And that is the grand narrative of truth over everything. Right, yeah. Oh, that's suicide, right? So that's kind of how that works out.
That's great. I did enjoy your book, and I made sure to point it out because I also was speaking to me, but calling people to a higher standard. Things like you can't just go in with what you know right now. Continue to learn, continue to understand Scripture. Right. If either side gets angry, you lose, and so it was always a nice reminder about kind of the mindset that a Christian should have to kind of take it slow and understand that you're talking to someone who is made in the image of God. And within the types of these discussions, I mean, you have examples of all sorts of famous people that you're having over the conversation with on the radio and part of your job. But most of the time, it's going to be our friends, our family. It's going to be people that we have a close bond with that we don't want to put our thumb in their eye and tell them, good, now you're
sure,
blind.
That's right. Thump them on the chest or something like that. Yeah, you don't want to bruise the fruit. And probably, the problem is with guys like us is we love doing that kind of thing. We love poking people in the eye and thumping them on the chest and telling them they're wrong, because we know better. So anyway, so that is a liability, and this is where we have to remind ourselves. And this is true for me too. I'm just saying, I'm just like you guys and everybody else viewing. I got to get down, feet on the ground, in the dust, trying to not get angry and not get the other person angry if I can avoid it. But so I have to attend to those things, and it's why Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 3 in the famous passage about defending the faith, that we should do it with gentleness and reverence. severance. Oh, how'd that get in there?
You recently did an interview with Eli Allah, and he has an amazing ministry because so many people love him because of his just demeanor and how he emphasizes that among everyone. People who are presuppositionalists, people who aren't, people who are atheists, people who hate him. I'm always, if I ever interview him, I want to ask him if he's ever had a bad day because his disposition is always so cheerful.
I guarantee you he probably has, if not, he's unique because all of us, I'll tell you the kind of person that really sets me off. And I mean, this happens with my kids too, is somebody who interrupts a lot. Now that's a steamroller, and we do have a defensive technique for that. That's very effective, and it works, but you have to have some steel in order to employ it because steamrollers are tough. But when somebody's interrupted, bang, 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 that's when the temperature rises, and then I really have to, okay, count it down, brother, and employ the tactic and get back in control. But that's when I get testy.
And
really
understand people can have the last word, and you don't need the last word either.
That's right. Sometimes if you're backing out of a conversation, I actually got this from Dennis Prager. Some of your viewers may know him. He's a Jewish guy, not a Christian, very religious Jew, but
Prager, right? He's on there as PragerU, I think he has a.
Yes, that's right. And PragerU gets 1 billion views a year. I mean, that guy, he moves the meter. Yeah. But in his radio demeanor, and he's my radio mentor. I actually knew Dennis before I even started radio, and so I follow him in the demeanor because he's such a gracious individual, and he is willing to give someone the last word. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to people. Wow, let them have the last word. Well, that's the last word that's ringing in people's minds. It's going to be so persuasive. Oh, wait a minute. It's only going to be persuasive if it's persuasive. And a lot of times it's not. Right. If you've said something substantive to get people to think contrary, then that's going to stick too. But when you say, I'll let you have the last word, what this does is not just show that you're generous and gracious. It also shows that you're confident.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is a powerful apologetic in its own. So I mentioned that I didn't become a Christian based on Christian evidences, but it was my younger brother Mark who was the main gardener in my life to bring me to a point of harvest with Christ. And Mark was very confident. That was one of the biggest that he really cared about me, and he was really confident of the truth, and he just wasn't going to let go. He was like a rag dog, man, hanging on to me. So
let's just make sure we've been kind of talking around the book, and we've really assumed that everybody has read it or at least are familiar with it. Why don't you just kind of walk us briefly through the tactics book, and so that folks clearly understand what you're trying to do and how it works.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's a good point, Tony. We have been talking around it. The book is divided into let me back up and put it this way. What tactics are principles of maneuvering in conversation. Pretty straightforward. And the principles are meant to accomplish a particular goal in the conversation, and that is to stay in the driver's seat. You don't want to be pulled around by somebody else in the conversation. You want to be in the driver's seat, not pulling them around kind of in a negative way, but be the one who is the conversation is going in the direction that you want it to go. Now, this is a good example right here, gentlemen. I mean, you guys are the hosts and I'm the guest, all right? I'm doing all the heavy lifting. You guys are relaxed there, but it's going in the direction that you want it to go because you're managing it by using questions, all right? And that's the key to the game plan. I call it the Columbo Tactic after Lieutenant Columbo of ancient TV fame.
I just wonder if the DVD sales spiked for Columbo and Dragnet when you released your 10th
a lot of people have told me they've started watching. But part of Columbo is that the character is that he comes in under the radar. He does not seem dangerous. And the way those murder mysteries work, the bad guy, the murderer, right at the front end, and they're usually part of the crowd or the community or whatever that that's part of this whole murder scene, and so he's not going to scare anybody off by his demeanor. He doesn't look threatening at all, but he does use questions, and a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, and then pretty soon he's got him, And so using questions is going to be the game plan proper, and that consists of 3 simple steps. And I'll just give it to you quickly. The first step, and this is what I encourage people not to worry about, is the end game, winning people to Christ. Do not even think about that. That kind of takes care of itself with the guidance of the Holy Spirit if you do the foundational work, which I call gardening, by the way. And so in the gardening kind of phase, you want to first gather information. You're engaging somebody. You may not know anything about their convictions, or you might know generally. Maybe they're an atheist. Maybe it's Uncle Fred. He's going to come by on Thanksgiving, and he's the family atheist, But maybe you've never given Uncle Fred a chance to talk. You just got a big fight with him. So the first thing you want to do is gather as much information about the other person's view as possible. The second step is you want to understand why they hold the view they hold. And this is called reversing the burden of proof. And many times it's the other person that is making the claim of some sort against Christianity. There is no God. There was no Jesus. The Bible's been changed, on and on and on and on. Christian history is the biggest, the most deaths as a result of religion, et cetera, and bloodshed. So these are all claims. Well, if somebody makes a claim, it's their job to defend the claim. And so at the outset, I'm encouraging Christians, you don't make the claim, let them make the claim, and then have them defend it. So your first step is to gather information, and you use a question like, what do you mean by that? That's a very, very basic model question, and lots of variations. There's a story in the book about the witch in Wisconsin that I met, who is a vendor and had a big pentagram around her neck. And I didn't know she was a witch until I asked her. But I didn't say, "Are you a witch?" I said, "She's a witch." Sounds like a Monty Python routine. So what I said was, I looked at her pentagram. I said, does that jewelry have religious significance for you? And she said, "Yes, I'm a pagan." And then that initiated the conversation. So what's a pagan, and what are your beliefs? And that initiated the conversation, which is there in the book. But notice I just used that model question or some form of that to kind of launch into the conversation. And then the second step is to reverse the burden of proof, and we use some form of the question, how did you come to that conclusion? Notice in these first 2 steps of the game plan, you don't really have to know much. Actually, you don't have to know anything. You're letting the other person do the talking, but you're letting your questions force them to be more clear about their own ideas. Now, what's really crazy about this, fellas, is that even though when I'm in play at that point, even though I am not making a point, because I'm asking for clarification of their views, they have to clarify them, and a lot of times they can't. Right. A standard circumstance is that people say things they hear other people say. They've been socialized to say it, but they've never thought about it. Okay, and so when you ask them about what they just said, they even have a hard time explaining what they mean. Right. And this is what I call the Simon and Garfunkel moment. If you remember those 2 guys in that song in 1966. Sorry, this is like a 60s alert here. And the song is Sounds of Silence. And so you're just going to get the sounds of silence. And when you ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for believing that? You're going to get the sounds of silence. Now, my conviction is, just getting to a person to that point, the first 2 steps, even if you don't go any further, is going to get them thinking, okay? And that's my goal. The way I characterize my goal here is that my goal is not to win them to Christ, because that takes a long time with most people. I'm just I'm gardening. I'm not harvesting, okay? And my goal is simply to, as I put it, put a stone in their shoe. And when I'm speaking to a secular audience, I tell them that right out of the gate. I get introduced, I walk up there, and I'm a little small talk, and I say, here, I'm not here to convert you today. I'm a follower of Jesus, but I'm not here to convert you. I just want to annoy you. In a good way. I want to put a stone in your shoe, is what I tell them, and I want you walking out of here kind of scratching your head, annoyed in a good way about something that I've said. And if I can do that, then I'm a happy camper. So the goal here is modest. It's just to put a stone in someone's shoe. And you can accomplish that without any background knowledge of theology or apologetics at all, often by just asking the other person to clarify their view and give their reasons for the view. And that's part of I got lots of stories we don't have time to tell you here, but even when I didn't want to engage, I'm in a hotel at like 7 a.m. in Seattle. I've had a couple of days of conference teaching. I'm tired. I got to go speak at a church later. I did not want to talk about Jesus at all, man. That was the last thing, Many people know before my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist, so leave me alone, But this gal was all bubbling and everything, and she starts talking to me and want to know why I'm in Seattle, and I just wanted to go away. And so I figured I know what I'll do. I'll just tell her, I'm going to be preaching at a church here in another hour or so. And I figured, okay, now she'll run off. And she said, oh, that's great. I said, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Why, are you a Christian? Oh, no, I'm not a Christian. I used to be a Christian, but not anymore. Now the universe takes care of me. Huh? What does that mean? And so she keeps saying this new agey stuff, and I just can't help myself. What's up with that? Now, I was very polite to her, but I'm asking her for clarification. Then she finally goes away, and I was glad. But then she comes back maybe 10 minutes later, and she said, you know what? Nobody has ever asked me questions like you've asked me. Honest to God, this is what she said to me. Wow. And it got me thinking. And so I said to her, well, if I had more time, I could ask you more questions and you could do some more thinking. But this is a great example of the power of the game plan, because I don't even want to do this right then, go away, that's with my heart. Yet,
so the pressure was really off.
Yeah. So, but still, it's something the Holy Spirit used. Now, the third step of the game plan, just to round this out, is to make a point. And so this is where we, in a sense, go on the offensive, trying to make a point, but we always use questions to do it. Maybe the point is our own point of view that we work around to using questions to accomplish that, or maybe the point that we're trying to do is to show a weakness or a flaw in the other person's view. So when the atheist is faulting God for his immoral ethnic cleansing, for example, in the Old Testament, then my question is, what is the standard that you're using, or where are you getting the standard to judge God by? Because you're an atheist, right? So where does that come from? That's a completely legitimate question. Notice the kind of mild-mannered way that I'm offering it. I'm not pointing the finger and saying, you can't do that. You have no standard. You're an atheist. You have no morality. Instead, it's this question. Now he's got it. Every time you ask a question, the ball goes in the other person's court. And this is the value of that kind of approach. So that's the first section of the book, the game plan. The rest of the book are a series of individual tactics. I mentioned suicide earlier. Taking the roof off is a tactic of Francis Schaeffer that I employ there in the book. That's basically that's like a reductio, where you accept their point of view for the sake of argument, and then you follow it out to its logical conclusion. And so you can do that with the atheist and the morality thing. So you're telling me, atheists, that there is no God, right? It's only material stuff, right? Then morality can't exist, as I understand it, right? So then when it comes to an objection about genocide, then you have no grounds to object to genocide, if I understand your view correct. Is that right? Now what's he going to do? See, what I did is I gave his view a test drive, and I showed it went right over the cliff. Okay, and there's a new tactic that I have in the 10th anniversary edition of the book called Inside Out, which is something I use a lot, and it also trades a bit on a Francis Schaeffer insight that all human beings are made in the image of God, and therefore, even if they deny that, they still are that. And being made in the image of God, there are certain things that are built into them that they cannot get away from. And all we have to do is listen, and then we're going to see these things and identify a number of them. And the point here, and the way I end the chapter is, they may run from God, but they can't run from themselves.
Right.
And so within them turned out to be all these things that you can take advantage of and ask questions about and whatever to help them to see your point more clearly. There's also Just the Facts, Ma'am. I mentioned earlier about religion has caused more bloodshed than anything else in history. Well, this is just flat out false. And then in the 10th anniversary edition, I give a lot of statistical background for that. And there are a lot of claims that people make that are just not factually sound. And so there's about 8 or 10 tactics. I have a new one in the new book called What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
Yeah,
and the point of that is to use Jesus on your side when you are making a case, so
make them argue with Jesus, basically. Right?
Exactly right. And this was an approach I used when I did a TV debate with Deepak Chopra, probably the best known New Age guru in the world. And the idea is that, as you pointed out, Tony, let Jesus do the arguing. So people are bugged because you said, Jesus is the only way of salvation. They say, wait, I can understand how that would bother you. It bothered me too, But I didn't make that up. That's what Jesus said. So do you think Jesus was mistaken? Now, notice how that's a question. Mm-hmm. Now the ball's in their court. Right. It's easy to say Koukl's mistaken. It's a lot harder to say Jesus is mistaken because Jesus has high Q. That is, he's got a lot of popularity in our culture. They don't know what he taught, but they think he's a really nice guy who, is about social justice and helping the poor and loving everybody and accepting everybody. This is their mistaken understanding of Jesus because they never read him. But since they respect Jesus, we can use Jesus as an ally in our discussions with other people. So that gives you an idea, kind of a broad overview of how the book is structured and the kinds of things you can find in the book.
Yeah, good.
We here are presuppositionalists and unapologetic about it, and so your book does cover a lot of those insights that we bring. Saying, we all have standards that we bring to the table. Let's discuss those.
Sure.
Building off questions by what standard is kind of the nomenclature for us. And so, do you tend to more operate within kind of that framework of apologetic method, or do you kind of like
No, I understand the differences really well, and I did a lot of studying on this a number of years ago. And when people say, well, I'm kind of half and half, well, they don't understand the issues then, because they're really two very different theological and philosophical approaches to the project. Now, there may be overlap in techniques and the way conversations work and stuff like that, but they're really guided by different principles. I am not a presuppositionalist. I would be considered. The way I tell people is they look at all these different types of apologetic approaches. I say, well, there's presuppositionalists and then there's everybody else, because that's the two categories, really. Everybody else are just versions of evidentialists, and whether it's classical or historical or whatever. I actually think that Francis Schaeffer was an evidentialist, and but who was very sensitive to the issue of presuppositions. I mean, maybe that's an open question for you guys, but that's the way I would characterize myself. And maybe the simplest way of putting it, because when people ask me about this, and you guys know that sometimes the discussion about the distinctions is somewhat philosophically and theologically technical, I just tell them, and my apologies to my presuppositionalist friends here, I just tell them I think it's a tempest in a teapot. And well, that means I'm not a presuppositionalist, obviously. And that instead, what I try to do is I try to make my defense of Christianity in the same way as I see the biblical individuals making their defense of Christianity, whether it's Jesus or whether it's the apostles in the book of Acts or whatever. And I think if we are following their model, what they're doing, whatever our other convictions might be about theological or philosophical underpinnings, we're probably going to be safe.
So I guess that kind of leads into kind of almost an atheist version of your book. And I would hate to characterize it just as that, but we talked about Peter Boghossian and his Manual for Creating Atheists. And in that book, he says that Christians operate on this principle of blind faith, and he defines faith as either belief without evidence or pretending to know things you don't know, which are definitely biblical definitions of that word, and we wouldn't go against that. But how do you then kind of answer this? How do Christians kind of know Christianity is true? What would be the response?
Well, you're right. By the way, Boghossian, I think, does have the Manual for Creating Atheists, or Manual for Atheists. I have it back here. It is kind of a tactics book for atheists. They're very similar, and what's very interesting about his approach, and I admire the approach, because what he says is to his people, he says, don't argue for atheism. He also says, don't argue against Christianity. He's got a very, very focused approach, and the focused approach is you ask questions about their convictions and the justification for their convictions, because he's convinced there is no justification for convictions. Faith has no evidence, or else it wouldn't be faith. Notice there's another attempt to impose a definition there. Okay, now it's interesting, and here's one verse for people to think of that will kind of hold them in good stead in answering from the scripture that particular claim. And it's right at the end of the Gospel of John, and it's easy to remember because it's immediately after Thomas. When Thomas says, I got to stick my finger in all that stuff, and Jesus is going, that is a bit much, Thomas, and some people take Jesus' remarks as evidence that he wants blind faith, but they haven't read the next verse, because what John says is he gives in the next verse, chapter 20, verse 21, I think it is, the reason why he wrote the entire gospel. And here's what he says. He says that many other signs and wonders Jesus performed. That's miracles. There's 7 of them in the Gospel of John. Many others he performed that are not written in this book, but these have been included essentially in order that you might believe. That what? Jesus is the Christ and the Son of God, and in believing have life in his name. So there he connects John in the most famous gospel in the world, right? He connects faith, belief with the evidence. So it's clear that Jesus isn't asking for blind faith from Thomas because that would be a contradiction right there within 2 verses, all right, which I don't think John was really stupid, all right. But what it does is connects the evidence with belief. So, but Boghossian first sets the stage by misdefining faith, and unfortunately, there are a lot of Christians that see it that way, if not in fact, at least in practice. That is, they have no good reasons they can offer why Christianity might be true. So it's easy to get a Christian stuck if you ask them the right questions. And by the way, I've done it before. And so have other my friends. They go, I was on an airplane the other day, and I was sitting next to a guy reading the Bible, so I just, basically played the atheist, and started asking questions, and maybe Sean McDowell or Frank Turek or J. Warner Wallace, these giants, right? And they're laying it on the guy. And then, sooner or later, we got to kind of show our hand, and but it just demonstrates that Christians are unprepared, okay? And this is what Boghossian is trading on. He is also trading, I think, illicitly on a technique of asking questions, because I think his technique, and you can see the examples where he's distorting things, and the biggest distortion, of course, is his misdefining faith. And listen, if faith is belief without evidence, why wouldn't that same definition legitimately apply to an atheist? Because atheists don't give evidence for the non-existence of God. They don't think they need to, because they don't think they have a belief. But of course they have a belief. They believe God doesn't exist. That's a belief. That's their belief. Yeah. Yes, they lack a belief in God, but they don't lack belief. They believe there is no God. And hey, you don't write books about your non-beliefs. Right? Yeah. I don't know. I have no belief of any kind of who the best footballer team is in Australia, for example. I don't know. I'm just taking something. I know in New Zealand it's the All Blacks, so I know that one. But I don't know in Australia. I have no idea. So I can legitimately say I have no belief, because I have no information by which I can form a belief. And therefore, I'm never going to write anything about footballers in Australia. All right? But these guys write whole books and give seminars and go on the radio and have websites. What are they talking about? Nothing? They're not. They're talking about their convictions. And see, this is why I think that whole approach is dishonest. And if I were an atheist, I would never take it. They do have a belief. They have a belief, a conviction, and they think it's true. And they think it's true that there is no God. Okay? And so, then the question is, what's your evidence for that? Now, in a certain sense, pardon me, it might be unfair to ask for evidence for the non-existence of something. And I wouldn't do that. I don't think they have to prove the universal negative kind of deal. I don't think that's a fair thing to ask of them. But if I'm just going to take their definition of faith and belief at face value, then they would be vulnerable to the same objection, it seems to me. So, and by the way, Doug Geibert, the philosopher over at Talbot, gave me this little insight. He said, he asked this question of the atheist who makes this maneuver. I'm going to make a statement, and I want you to respond and tell me whether you agree or you disagree, or you're just going to withhold. Here's the statement: God exists. So, do you agree? No, you don't agree, obviously, because you're an atheist, right? Okay, so do you withhold? Are you not weighing in one way or another on that? That would be an agnostic. Right. No. Well, then if you don't agree and you're not withholding, then you agree. You disagree, rather, with the statement God exists. You are claiming God does not exist. That's just the way it works. Right. And there are no other categories. That's exhaustive. Right.
So now you ask the question, how did you come to that conclusion?
Right. Well, you could. Yeah, what are your reasons? Exactly. But again, I guess I'm not going to press somebody for the reasons they don't believe in God. I'm going to press the people for the reasons that they reject obvious evidences of God. And one of them is morality. I think the moral argument is great, and what proves the reality of objective morality is the problem of evil. Everybody knows something's wrong with the world. Everybody knows that. It doesn't matter when you lived or where you lived, they know something's wrong. And atheists bring this up all the time. The world is not the way it's supposed to be. But think about it. The world can't be the way it's not supposed to be unless there is a way the world is supposed to be, and you can't have a way the world's supposed to be without a sposer. All right. So that's the moral argument in a nutshell, so to speak. And this is something they have to answer for. What justifies all the moral judgments you make about all kinds of things that they must make, because inside them is a moral creature that made in the image of God? That's the inside-out tactic. Right. What justifies all that? And so these are kind of the ways that one might maneuver in those kinds of conversations.
Great, that's really helpful. Yeah, I'm gonna steal a lot of that for what I have to do.
Well, and steal my stuff, man. Yeah. That's great. It's fine with me. That's what I want to do.
And just we greatly appreciate you coming on, and I just kind of want to end with a frontline perspective. We've been asking this to people like J. Warner Wallace and Lydia McGrew. Where do you see the future of Christian apologetics going? And that could be within your own ministry or just in general.
Well, I think it's blossoming magnificently and has been for the last 20 years. And it's I don't know if I can put my finger on one particular reason apart from the sovereign movement of God. But I think one reason is because as the pressure and resistance from the world heats up, there's more resistance against Christianity, which means more resistance against Christians. And then Christians are realizing, man, I don't have the goods. How do I deal with these issues? Mm-hmm. I think also, and William Lane Craig has made this observation, that for the last 20 or 30 years, significant strides have been made in the area of philosophy of religion, with evangelical Christians really shining there. And there's a trickle-down effect. So at Stand to Reason, we're kind of, we consider ourselves kind of translators. So we'll read the Bill Craigs and the J.P. Morelands, and Doug Geivitz and people like that, and then we'll do our best to translate that into language that is accessible to the rank and file. It's not the cookies on the lowest shelf, because some of those cookies can't go down to the bottom shelf. But what we can get them down there, if they reach up a little bit, they can get them. And so I think the progress that's been made in the area of philosophy and the world of ideas that has a trickle-down effect to be into practical application in Christian apologetics. I think the increasing hostility that's coming from the culture is a factor, and I do think that the growth of so many organizations that are focusing in on this and making provision for this. There are a lot of programs now that at Biola there's an apologetics master's, at HBU there's a master's, SES has a master's, and I mean there are more and more. Colorado Christian I think has a program, and Lee Strobel's involved with. So more and more writers, more and more individuals with organizations, more and more universities are making this information accessible. And then with the explosion of the internet, and even ironically with the last 6 months of everybody having to pivot with the political consequences of COVID, look, here we are. I never used to. I got a camera, man. I got a camera hanging right here. I bought it, a low guy or whatever, and I got a microphone, I never had that kind of stuff. But this now gives me an access that I never had before. And this is, in a sense, fortuitously propelled us into a higher level of productivity using digital media and the like. So there are all kinds of things that are converging. There's a massive number of Christians who have no clue. But I think that more will be getting a clue as we get more visibility and more teams like what you're doing, Patrick and Tony. And, there are lots and lots of YouTubers now that are doing fabulous work and are gathering a following. And the more we all work together, like we're doing right now, the way we encourage each other and, keep our head about ourselves and not believe our own press, but just go out and serve and do good work and have a good attitude, I think the better suited the body of Christ will be to engage the increasingly hostile issues that we're facing. And I'll just say, critical theory has just come out like a gangbuster in the last 6 months, and probably a lot of people don't even know what critical theory is. Mm-hmm. But the students have been weaned on that for the last 10 years at every university in the country, and now more and more at Christian universities. Yeah. It's tragic. But it's a competing worldview that has certain appeal for Christians because Christians care about oppression and they care about racism, and they because of their moral virtue, but they don't realize that this is a Trojan horse that is dragging them into a false worldview. Yeah. And so now we got you, me, our teams, we got a whole new area to develop and teach and train and to pass on to the body so they're not taken down by this. So there's always something going on.
Yeah, well said. Thank you.
Yeah, and I say it for every single time that I meet heroes of the faith like yourself. Is, we just started this podcast because this is what we were already doing every other Saturday over coffee, and so we were like, let's film it. And now we get to meet the authors that we read, and that's amazing. So I appreciate you getting the camera and the microphone and coming on and taking this hour to talk with us.
Yeah. Well, I don't have to take 3 days to fly somewhere and do a presentation. I'm just right here. I got my pajama bottoms on, truth be told. So, and I'm in my
pajama industry grew.
Yeah. Well, see, Zoom. We're using Zoom, and Zoom you can put those backgrounds in it. So I chose the messy office background. For mine.
Atheists called us our jail cell. So we're
that's right. Yeah, nothing fancy there. So.
So Stand to Reason, str.org. Where else can people interact with your content? YouTube and.
Well, yeah, we have a great team that manages all of our social media stuff, and to be honest with you, I can't keep up with all that. I just don't even know what it's called, right? So I know this is Zoom, all right. That's not exactly social media; it's a tool for what we're doing, but we have all that stuff: YouTube and Pinterest and Pokemon and Hula Boola or whatever comes out next, But you can, if you go to our website str.org and then scroll down down to the bottom of the homepage, I think all the links to all of our things are there. We have a God blog, for example, where we weigh in on a regular basis with things. We have what we call a kind of a newsletter. It's called Solid Ground, but it's a misleading title because you're not going to find pictures of our staff at bake sales or something like that. You're going to get a hard-hitting article. It comes out every other month. And then alternating months, we have a mentoring letter. Now, I author those most of the times, and it's my way of mentoring those who are part of our larger constituency. Now, you can get that online on our website, but if you sign up for it, it'll be sent to you virtual, and that's the easiest way to get it. Or you can get our app. So on your phone, looking for my phone, I don't actually use the app, so I don't know how to use the app, but I know we got apps, and we have 2 different apps, and they've just been updated, and it's very, very easy to navigate through the standard things that we offer on a regular basis to keep your listeners equipped with the newest stuff. Probably in January, the Solid Ground, I'll probably do a short series, maybe 2 or 3 Solid Grounds through the middle of the year on critical theory, just to bring people up to speed so they can figure out what the heck is going on here and how am I supposed to respond to this as a Christian. So, people are getting much more pressure from their environment, from the social institutions. They're being forced at their work to read books that are inconsistent with their worldview. And if they don't read it, they maybe lose their job or get a lot of hostile pressure.
Inconsistent with common sense, but anyway.
Yes, of course.
We have to go there.
That's right. Yeah. No, but first out though, Tony, out of the gate, and especially when you have some really ugly things that happen that a lot of press is being given to, I can see how it strokes the sympathies of people of good and virtuous character. And but what's being fed to them is poison, as you know. And this is what we have to help our people with. Just another thing to deal with.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, if you've joined us over these past few weeks, the book has been Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. Thank you, Greg Koukl, for discussing your Christian convictions with us. And I hope we can call on you again when we do.
Of course. It's a real treat. And that book, by the way, if you're getting one, see that little red thing in the middle? That's the 10-year anniversary edition. That's the one you want to get. And then there's also the story of reality, how the world began, how it ends, and everything important that happens.
I always appreciate when the authors themselves read the audiobook. So if you go to Audible, and we'll include the links below.
I did do that.
Yeah. In fact, you did what I always extol authors to do, is put the footnotes at the bottom. And you actually read the footnotes in the audiobook. I was reading along with your book because I bought it for the show. And I was like, oh, he's reading the details. That's what I love. That's awesome.
Yeah, I did. In most cases, I did. Right.
So thank you again for coming on, and we greatly appreciate you and your work.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure, and please keep up the good work. I'm glad to see you on board. I'm glad to see what you're doing, and we need every hand on deck right now.
That's right.
Yeah, you're awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us today.